There comes a moment in your life when you realize reacting has cost you more than silence ever could. Not because you became mature, not because you suddenly found peace, but because you finally saw the pattern. You noticed how predictable you were, how every word they threw at you got a response, how every accusation pulled an explanation out of you, how every bit of disrespect still received your energy. You were always there, defending, clarifying, explaining yourself to people who never intended to understand you. And then something shifted. One day, the same words that used to trigger you didn't move you anymore. The same tactics fell flat. The same manipulation met. Nothing. No argument. No anger. No emotional performance. Just silence. And that silence wasn't accidental. It was earned. Because reacting had become exhausting. You realized every response fed something in them. Your anger gave them relevance. Your explanations gave them importance. Your emotions gave them control. So you stopped. Not loudly. Not dramatically. You didn't announce it. You didn't warn anyone. You just withdrew. And that's when the real shift began. Because silence does something words never can. It removes access. It breaks patterns. It introduces uncertainty. They were used to you playing your role. The emotional one, the responsive one, the one they could provoke and predict. But now, they don't know where you stand. They don't know what you feel. They don't know how to reach you. And that terrifies people more than anger ever will. Because anger still means you're engaged. Silence means they no longer have a grip. You see, most people don't listen to words. They listen to reactions. They measure their importance by how much emotion they can pull from you. So when you stop reacting, they don't feel ignored. They feel displaced. They start replaying old conversations in their head, wondering what changed, wondering when they lost access, wondering why the version of you they could control no longer exists. And here's the truth most people won't admit. Your silence didn't confuse them because it was unclear. It confused them because it was final. No closure, no explanation, no emotional door left open. Just absence where control used to be. If you've ever reached this stage in your life where silence feels more powerful than speaking, where distance feels safer than explaining, where withholding your reaction feels like self-respect, then you already understand something most people never will. And if this feels familiar, follow closely. Because this isn't about being cold. This is about understanding power. Why your reaction was currency. Most people never realize this, but reactions are a form of payment. Every time you respond emotionally, you are giving something away. Your anger, your explanations, your frustration, your need to be understood. All of it has value. And the people who kept provoking you knew exactly what they were collecting. They learned your patterns before you did. They knew what to say to get a reaction. What topic would pull you into a long explanation? What accusation would make you defend your character? Not because they cared, but because your reaction confirmed something for them. It confirmed relevance. It confirmed access. It confirmed power. You see, when someone can affect your emotional state, they don't feel close to you. They feel above you. That's why some people never wanted resolution. They wanted repetition. The same argument. the same emotional cycle, the same outcome where you end up drained and they walk away satisfied. Your reaction was proof that they still mattered. Think about it. If they truly wanted peace, one conversation would have been enough. If they wanted understanding, they would have listened. If they wanted growth, they would have changed. But they didn't, because what they wanted wasn't clarity. It was control. Every response you gave reassured them that they still had influence over you, that they could still reach you, that no matter how they showed up, you would engage. And engagement is intimacy to people who don't know how to connect honestly. That's why some people only speak to you when they want something. Why they provoke instead of communicate. Why they escalate instead of resolve. They don't know how to be close without friction. They don't know how to feel important without resistance. So they push, and you respond, until one day you don't, and that's when the currency disappears. Because silence gives them nothing to spend, no emotion to feed on, no explanation to twist, no reaction to analyze. Just emptiness where influence used to be. And emptiness is uncomfortable for people who relied on you emotionally. That's why the moment you stopped reacting, the dynamic felt different. Not calmer, stranger, because the unspoken agreement broke. The agreement where you would always respond, always explain, always react. And when you removed that agreement, you didn't just change the relationship. You changed the balance of power. If this is starting to sound familiar, follow closely. Because once you see how reactions work, you can never unsee it. What happens inside them when you stop reacting? The moment you stop reacting, something inside them shifts. Not immediately on the surface, but internally. At first, they don't panic. They assume it's temporary. They tell themselves you're just busy, distracted, tired. Because in their mind, you always come back. So they repeat the same behavior, the same tone, the same triggers. And when nothing happens, confusion sets in. They start replaying interactions in their head, rereading messages, reanalyzing conversations, looking for the exact moment they lost you, because predictability is comfort, and you just became unpredictable. They were used to knowing how you would respond, how long it would take, what emotion they would get. Now there's no feedback. And without feedback, people begin to question their influence. That's when the testing begins. A casual message, a neutral check-in, a sudden politeness that feels out of place. Not because they care how you're doing, but because they're checking access. They want to see if the door is still unlocked. And when the silence remains, the confusion deepens into anxiety. They start imagining reasons, creating stories in their head, filling the gap you left with assumptions. Silence forces people to confront uncertainty, and most people don't handle uncertainty well, because uncertainty removes control. They don't know if you're angry. They don't know if you've moved on. They don't know if you've outgrown them. And not knowing makes them restless. That restlessness slowly turns into irritation. They start telling themselves you're being distant on purpose, that you're ignoring them, that you think you're better now. And just like that, the narrative shifts. You didn't change. You didn't react. But in their mind, you became the problem. Because it's easier to label you cold than to admit they lost influence. And here's the part most people never see. Your silence doesn't make them feel ignored. It makes them feel exposed. Exposed to the reality that their presence alone was never enough. That without provoking you, they don't know how to connect. That without your reactions, they feel insignificant. So they escalate. They test harder, push further, say things they know might sting, because even a negative reaction is still a reaction. And if they can make you angry, they can still feel powerful. But when that fails, something darker appears. Resentment. Not because you hurt them, but because you stopped feeding them. If you're recognizing these patterns, follow closely, because understanding this is how you stop repeating it. Why they always try to pull you back in. Once they feel the distance, they don't let go quietly, because what you took wasn't small. You took access, and access is addictive to people who are used to having it. So they reach, not directly at first, not honestly. They approach sideways. They remind you of old memories, things you shared, moments when you were close, not because they miss the bond, but because they miss the version of you that responded. And then comes concern. They ask if you're okay, if something is wrong, if they did something, not to take responsibility, but to reopen conversation, because conversation is the doorway back to control. If nostalgia doesn't work, they try guilt. They remind you of how much they've done for you, how long they've known you, how you used to be different. Different meaning easier to reach, easier to provoke, easier to pull back into the cycle. And if guilt fails, accusations appear. You've changed. You're cold now. You think you're better than everyone. Notice how silence suddenly becomes disrespect when it no longer serves them, because your withdrawal forces them to feel something they avoided for a long time. Powerlessness. They were comfortable when you reacted. They felt secure when you explained. They felt important when you engaged. Your silence strips that away, so they escalate emotionally. They may speak badly about you, frame themselves as the victim, try to damage your image, not because you harmed them, but because they need to regain control somehow. And here's the part that's difficult to accept. People don't chase what they respect. They chase what they lost control over. If they truly valued you, they would approach with accountability, with reflection, with change. But instead, they chase the reaction. They want the old dynamic back, the one where you reacted and they remained unchanged. That's why pulling you back is never about resolution. It's about restoring the old balance. And the moment you break silence to explain yourself, the door opens again. They don't need to understand you. They just need to know they can still reach you. If you've ever felt tempted to respond just to clear your name, follow closely, because the next section reveals the truth most people miss. This is the truth most people avoid because it's uncomfortable. They don't miss you. They miss what they could do to you. They miss how available you were, how responsive you were, how emotionally reachable you were. They miss the version of you that made them feel powerful. Because when someone truly misses you, they respect your silence. They reflect. They change. But when someone misses access, they invade. They provoke. They pressure. That's the difference. You see, attachment is mutual. Access is one-sided. Attachment asks, "How are you?" Access asks, "Why aren't you responding?" Attachment allows distance. Access demands explanation. And when you stopped reacting, you unknowingly drew that line. The ones who cared stepped back. The ones who fed on you stepped forward. That's why the energy feels different now. Heavier, more aggressive. Because they're not mourning you. They're reacting to withdrawal. Your silence removed the emotional resource they depended on. They no longer get reassurance from your anger. They no longer get validation from your explanations. They no longer get stimulation from your frustration. And that absence forces them to confront a difficult reality. Without your reactions, they feel small. Not because you diminished them, but because they were borrowing significance from you. And when you stopped supplying it, the illusion collapsed. That's why they talk about you more now than when you were present. Why they analyze you now more than when you were available. Your silence made you unpredictable. And unpredictability disrupts people who relied on patterns. Especially patterns where they always won emotionally. If this resonates, follow closely, because understanding this changes how you move forever. Silence speaks fluently to those who know how power works. Without saying a word, your silence communicates boundaries you never had to announce. It says you are no longer available for emotional games. It says access to you is no longer automatic. You didn't argue. You didn't explain. You didn't demand respect. You simply removed yourself from the equation. And that is what makes it unsettling. Because explanations invite debate. Silence ends it. When you stop reacting, you stop giving people material to work with. No emotions to twist. No words to misinterpret. No energy to drain. Your silence forces them to sit alone with their own intentions. It tells them you see the pattern clearly now, that you understand what was happening, that you no longer need to participate to prove anything. And the most powerful part is this: you didn't punish them. You didn't confront them. You didn't seek revenge. You simply became unavailable. That kind of withdrawal doesn't create noise. It creates awareness. They may never admit it out loud, but your silence tells them something they feel deeply. You were never obligated to react. You were choosing to. And now, you've stopped choosing them. That realization stays with people far longer than any argument ever could. The warning most people ignore. This is where many people break. Not because they're weak, but because silence attracts pressure, guilt, doubt, curiosity. You start wondering if you're being unfair, if you owe an explanation, if staying silent makes you the villain. And that's the trap, because the moment you speak to explain your silence, you undo it. You don't need to justify your absence. You don't need to defend your boundaries. You don't need to clarify your peace. Explanations reopen negotiations. Silence closes them. The people who truly deserve access to you won't demand it. They'll respect the distance. They'll reflect instead of react. But those who depended on your reactions will keep pushing. Not for resolution, but for relief. Relief from the discomfort your silence created. And here's the truth that keeps you free. You are not responsible for how people feel when they lose access to you. You are only responsible for how you protect your energy. If this message is speaking directly to you, follow closely. Because understanding this is how you stop giving power away without realizing it. You didn't become cold. You became strategic. People will tell you that you changed, that you became distant, that you lost your warmth. What they're really saying is that you stopped being accessible. You didn't become cold. You became selective. You learned that not every emotion deserves an audience. Not every thought needs to be shared. Not every provocation deserves a response. That's not bitterness. That's awareness. You realize that power isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't beg to be understood. Power observes. Power withdraws. Power moves quietly. You used to think strength meant standing your ground and explaining yourself. Now you understand strength is knowing when silence does more damage than words ever could. You no longer rush to correct narratives about you. You no longer chase closure from people who benefit from confusion. You no longer fight to be seen by those who only looked at you when they needed something. And that shift makes people uncomfortable, because they can't read you anymore. They can't predict you. They can't control the outcome. The calmest person in the room always holds the leverage. Let them feel the absence where your reactions used to live. Let them sit with the uncertainty. Let them wonder. You don't need to punish. You don't need to explain. You don't need to return to old patterns to prove you're kind. Your silence already said everything. It told them you saw through the dynamic. It told them you valued your energy. It told them access to you is earned, not assumed. And if they never understand why you went quiet, that's not your burden to carry. Some lessons are only learned through loss.